Greetings. The sky is still dark, but already, the day has begun. Somewhere near the banks of the Nile, a reed mat rustles, a clay lamp flickers, and a very tired man, with very sore feet, is trying to remember why he ever thought being a scribe would be glamorous. You are that man. You are a middle-class Egyptian scribe. You live in a small, sun-baked village about 30 minutes by donkey from Thebes, assuming the donkey cooperates today. And this is your average morning. You wake with the sun, or maybe just before it. You're not sure. There's no clock, only the cries of ibis birds, and the unmistakable sound of your neighbor's goat trying to climb onto a grain basket again. You reach for your pillow, which is, of course, not a pillow. It's a carved wooden headrest designed to cradle the curve of your neck. It is ergonomically perfect for someone with no nerve endings. You stretch, carefully. Your spine makes a sound like a distant papyrus scroll being unrolled. You're sore, because last night your cousin Many brought over too much beer and challenged you to write your name in hieroglyphs with your left hand. He won. You suspect cheating. But today is not for cousins or left-handed hieroglyphics. Today is for bureaucracy, because you are a scribe. Not just any scribe, but an officially trained, ink-stained, semi-respected, only occasionally mocked by priests scribe. You were trained in a scribal house as a boy. You learned to write over 700 hieroglyphs. You memorized tax codes, harvest tallies, and extremely boring royal speeches. You still have dreams about a particularly difficult verb tense that translates to. And then the sacred boat did not arrive, although it almost did. You are important, vital to the function of the kingdom, trusted to record crops, census data, and who forgot to pay their mud brick quota this year. You carry a reed pen, a palette of black and red ink, and a satchel filled with rolled scrolls that smell like mildew, destiny, and goat hair. You are, in short, a walking filing cabinet, and no one can read your handwriting but you. Perfect. But before we go any further, take a moment to breathe. You've already traveled far, at least 3,000 years into the past. And if you've enjoyed the journey so far, why not leave a little offering of your own? Like this video. Subscribe if you'd like more historical bedtime adventures. And write in the comments, if you lived in ancient Egypt, would you rather be a scribe or a priest? Or would you rather just nap on the roof and avoid responsibility altogether? Either way, we'd love to know. Your morning routine is simple. You reach for your toothstick, a thin twig from a neem or date tree, chewed at the end to create bristles. You dip it into a gritty white powder made of ground limestone, burnt eggshells, and for freshness, a pinch of dried mint. The result? A mouthfeel somewhere between sandpaper and what regret tastes like. You spit. You gag. You move on. Breakfast is bread. Always bread. Barley bread. Dense, cracked, and oddly gray. It was baked 3 days ago by your neighbor Nefru, who swears it was blessed by the goddess Tarit herself. It wasn't. You gnaw on it thoughtfully, feeling bits of stone from the millstone crunch between your molars. Next to you, your wife is trying to shoo a fly away from your daughter's nose with a folded piece of papyrus that once recorded fish inventory. This is multitasking. This is magic. This is family life. You reach for your cup. It's warm, slightly foamy, smells like barley and consequences. Yes, it's beer. And yes, it's breakfast. In ancient Egypt, beer is life. Beer is sustenance. Beer is how you wash down the pain of your dental insurance, which does not exist. This isn't the fizzy amber stuff of modern bars. This is thick, soupy, cloudy barley mash, full of nutrition, and occasionally weevils. You sip carefully, hoping this batch doesn't have quite the same aftertaste as last week's batch, which made your neighbor hallucinate that his cat was Anubis. He tried to give it an offering. It bit him. Justice was swift. Your first task of the day. Count the bricks. You were asked to supervise a new mud brick wall for a minor temple nearby. Technically, this is not your job, but the priest in charge says it's beneath him, and the bricklayers say the priest owes them 3 jars of figs. You're not sure who's correct, so you bring your tablet and hope no one throws a chisel at you. You arrive at the site. 30 bricks, neatly stacked, labeled with the royal seal, and a large cat. Yes, there's a cat asleep on top of the bricks. It looks at you like you've disturbed a sacred ritual. You apologize to the cat. You count the bricks anyway. You make a note. 30 bricks. One divine obstruction. Offer milk. You walk back from the temple site, feeling the sun creep higher on your back. The day is only beginning, and already your tunic is sticking to you in 3 places. You pass by a basket vendor who nods at you without enthusiasm, as if to say, "Yes, another day, another heat stroke." You nod back, the ancient Egyptian version of same. On the way home, a little boy runs past you carrying what looks like a frog tied to a stick. You decide not to ask. Some things are better left as mysteries. You arrive at your home, 2 rooms, mud brick, shaded by an awning woven from palm fronds. The outer walls are decorated with painted symbols meant to protect from snakes, bad dreams, and particularly aggressive tax collectors. Inside, your wife has already started sweeping dust into a neat little pile. You're not sure why, since more dust will arrive within minutes. It's part of the unspoken war between Egyptian households and the desert. And the desert is winning. She hands you a wet cloth to wipe your face. It smells faintly of lavender and donkey. You pretend not to notice the donkey part. That's love. Your daughter is feeding a stray cat with leftover fish bits from last night. The cat looks smug. She probably has 3 other families doing the same thing. But this is Egypt, and cats, as everyone knows, are minor deities in fur coats. You sit on a low stool in the shade and unroll a scroll. It's today's paperwork. Grain tallies from the last harvest, copied carefully by a junior scribe with handwriting that suggests either great haste or mild possession by a demon. You sigh. You dip your reed in the ink. You correct the number of sheaves listed from 700 to 70, because no one harvests 700 sheaves without divine intervention and 5 oxen. Then you pause, because across the street, the priest from yesterday is approaching. He has the walk of a man who either wants to ask you for a favor or complain about a neighbor's fig tree, possibly both. He greets you with an over-friendly grin and begins with the dreaded phrase, "Beloved of Thoth, I have a matter most urgent." You know where this is going. Within minutes, you are somehow responsible for checking the measurements of a sacred offering basin. Again, because the last time, apparently, the ceremonial incense floated the wrong direction, which was a bad omen and probably your fault. You accept the scroll he hands you. You accept that your afternoon plans now include a temple, a ladder, and a clay measuring rod. You smile, because in Egypt, this is what a good day looks like. You eat lunch with your family. A stew made of lentils, onions, and just enough garlic to make your cousin Many cry from across the courtyard. There is more beer, of course, always beer. The bread is slightly less painful than this morning's, and someone remembered to sprinkle it with cumin this time. You talk about dreams, omens, the latest gossip about a merchant in town who accidentally insulted a statue of Horus and now claims his left leg has gone numb. You share a laugh. The heat fades just slightly. Then it's time to go back to work. The scribe's office is located in the administrative quarter, a glorified hut with 3 reed mats, 1 cracked writing table, and an inkwell that leaks like it's in mourning. You sit beside your colleague, Nani. She's been a scribe longer than you and can write a full transaction record without looking at the papyrus. You suspect she is part wizard. She grunts a greeting, nudges a half-eaten date pastry toward you, and returns to her records. You spend the afternoon recording tax payments. 3 jars of beer from one farmer, a goat from another, a promise to deliver bricks soon from a third, which you underline twice and add an exasperated lotus blossom doodle beside it for emphasis. Outside, the sun begins to lean west. The heat eases. The shadows grow long. Someone brings a basket of grapes to the office, a bribe, probably, but you record it under miscellaneous religious offerings and take one anyway. As the day winds down, you stop by the river. The Nile is calm today, flat like polished obsidian, quietly breathing. You wash your hands, splash your face, and listen to the distant sounds of boatmen yelling at each other over fish prices. A heron stalks something near the reeds. You stare at it, and for a moment, forget what century you're in. Then a child screams about a snake, someone drops a jug, and a goat walks into the water like it owns the place. Normality returns. You gather your things. Night is coming, but that's not your concern yet. There's still work to finish, notes to review, family to greet, scrolls to roll up and stow away before the cats chew them again. Tomorrow, it will begin the same way. The sun will rise. The beer will ferment. The bricks will misbehave. The priest will have opinions. And you, humble scribe, beloved of Thoth, keeper of ledgers and slightly bitter wit, will be there to write it all down. Because without you, no one remembers anything. And if there's one thing Egyptians truly believe in, it's memory. The Nile has flooded. Again, not too much, not too little, just enough to make the gods nod in approval, and the farmers groan at the idea of moving their cattle. Again, this is the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt. Flood, plant, harvest. Pray the gods didn't sneeze that year. But you're not in a palace. You're not under a golden canopy, listening to harp music and being fanned by palm leaves. You're in a field, in sandals, and your entire livelihood depends on whether the river gets the memo this year. Welcome to the agricultural class. It's dusty, sweaty, occasionally sacred, and full of really uncomfortable sunburns. Every year, without fail, or at least without much fail, the Nile floods its banks. To modern ears, this sounds disastrous. But for Egyptians, this flood was a blessing. The inundation, or ake, was a holy time. It meant the river had done its job. It had brought dark, rich silt up from the riverbed, thick, fertile mud that turned sand into soil and famine into feast. But between you and the feast, a few thousand hours of backbreaking labor, plus the hope that your neighbor's goats don't eat your barley shoots again. You rise with the sun, always. The workday starts before it's hot enough to melt your kneecaps. You gather your tools, a wooden hoe, a sickle made with flint teeth, and a linen cloth to wipe your face, which will be soaked with sweat by breakfast. If you're lucky, you have an ox. If you're very lucky, the ox listens to you. If not, well, that's why the gods invented shouting. Land in Egypt was sacred, and not just in the poetic sense. Most of it was technically owned by the pharaoh or the temples, which often felt like the same thing. You didn't own land so much as you were allowed to exist on it, as long as you paid taxes in the form of crops, labor, or both. You farmed the soil, but it wasn't yours. You harvested the wheat, but a scribe recorded how much you kept. You smiled, nodded, and hoped the temple priest didn't decide your field was suddenly spiritually significant. But you weren't powerless. Egyptian farmers were savvy. You traded favors. You teamed up with neighbors. You left offerings at the local shrine just often enough to keep divine wrath at bay. And sometimes the priests as well. And when the local scribe showed up to record your grain yield, you offered him a few dates, a smile, maybe a small chicken. He wasn't bribed, of course. He was blessed with hospitality. Let's talk about food. It starts with barley and emmer wheat, your best friends, and also your worst enemies. You grind the grain using a saddle quern, a flat stone with another stone you drag across it, back and forth, for hours. You hum to distract yourself. You think about how your mother used to do this while reciting proverbs. You try not to think about how much grit ends up in the flour. You bake the bread in conical clay ovens, shaped like upside-down flower pots. The bread is thick, heavy, dark. It could stop a chariot at full speed. But it fills your belly and soaks up your beer, so no one complains much. If you're lucky, there's more than bread. Lentils, onions, maybe some salted fish, if the nets were kind. Meat, rare. Reserved for festivals, funerals, or bribing officials. You eat with your fingers. You sit in the shade. You sweat flies and talk about the heat. Then back to work. Egyptians didn't have a 7-day week. Instead, time flowed with the rhythm of festivals, flooding seasons, and farming cycles. During peak seasons, planting or harvesting, you worked dawn to dusk. No exceptions. When things slowed, you repaired tools, built irrigation canals, or helped construct public buildings. There were breaks. Egyptians celebrated everything: the birth of a god, the festival of a gnome, the annual Let's Dance to Please Hathor parade. And those days, you rested, you sang, you drank, and usually you worked twice as hard the next day to catch up. But it was worth it, because nothing was more sacred than joy. Except, perhaps, the sun, which burned with holy fury from about 9 a.m. to sunset. You worked in its shadow, or with a wet linen cloth tied to your head, or with a large hat made of woven reeds and quiet desperation. Let's check in with the pharaoh, shall we? While you're sweating in the field, the pharaoh is offering wine to Ra, riding chariots, and making decisions about how many statues of himself to build this week. But it's not all leisure. Being pharaoh is a full-time job. You're not just king, you're a god on earth. The living Horus, the son of Ra, the man who wears a heavy crown and even heavier expectations. You hold festivals, you lead rituals, you inspect temples. And if something goes wrong, a drought, a poor harvest, a particularly rude eclipse, people blame you. So you build, you pray, you command an army of scribes, priests, architects, and extremely tired workers to raise monuments, temples, obelisks, and bureaucracy. And your wig is glorious, thick, braided, sometimes perfumed with myrrh and lotus oil. It weighs 3 pounds and hides all your anxieties. Let's say the fields are flooded. There's no planting to do. Congratulations. You now work for the state. You're sent to build a temple wall, help dredge an irrigation canal, or repair a collapsed grain silo. You're paid in beer and bread, the standard laborer's wage. And you know what? You're okay with that. You work alongside dozens of others, men and women both, under the supervision of a scribe who never seems to sweat. The work is hard, but the company is good. You gossip. You sing. You whisper about that one guy who claimed he saw a sphinx in the desert and now refuses to eat garlic. There's a sense of pride in the air. You're not just building walls, you're building legacy. And your mother said you'd never make anything of yourself. You head home with dust in your nose and hay in places hay should never be. Your back aches, your knees creak, and somehow, despite washing your hands, your fingernails still contain traces of onion, barley, and whatever that squishy thing was you stepped on this morning. As you walk, the sun begins its descent behind the palm trees. The shadows stretch, long and slow, across the ground. The world softens just a little. The color of everything becomes gold. Even the cows look majestic now. Almost. The one with the crooked horn still looks like she's plotting something. Your wife meets you at the door with a jug of water and a look that says, "I told you not to take the shortcut through the canal again." You thank her with a kiss on the cheek and a handful of fresh dates. She examines them critically, as only someone who's been tricked into eating underripe dates one too many times can. Some years, the Nile is late, or too low, or too high, and suddenly the miracle of life becomes the threat of death. Drought years are hard. The fields dry up. The grain yields drop. People hoard what they have. And you begin to hear whispers that maybe someone offended the gods, that maybe the temple neglected its offerings, that maybe Pharaoh himself is out of favor. It's during these years you learn how tight a community can become, or how quickly it can turn on itself. Temples open their stores. Rationing begins. You eat less, worry more, and hope the next flood washes away both the hunger and the blame. You start looking for omens in everything. How the ibis walks, which direction the wind blows, how the cats behave. When even the cats seem anxious, you know you're in trouble. Contrary to popular belief, ancient Egyptians did not just worship the gods and build pyramids in obedient silence. They also complained, often, and with flair. There are papyrus scrolls, actual historical documents, filled with complaints. About lazy workers, about late deliveries, about someone stealing a goose and claiming it fell into the river on its own. Geese don't just fall, the complaint reads, especially when they are tied to a rope. There are even records of farmers writing to the vizier, the pharaoh's top administrator, to protest unfair treatment by tax officials. And sometimes they were heard. You might not have modern courts, but you could show up to the local magistrate, present your case, often dramatically, and hope for mercy. It helped to look extra dusty and pitiful. Bonus points if you brought a witness. Double bonus if your witness wasn't your cousin pretending to be someone else. Let's not pretend the countryside is safe. You have to deal with scorpions, venomous snakes, crocodiles near the Nile, mosquitoes with absolutely no respect for sacred rituals. Also, angry geese, which may not sound threatening until you've met one with a grudge and a taste for blood. And then there's the spiritual danger. You leave amulets near your bed. You mark your door with protective symbols. You leave a bit of beer at the shrine of Tauret, goddess of childbirth and protectress of the home, just in case. If something goes wrong, illness, a spoiled crop, a sick child, you consult the priest healer. He might prescribe incantations, herbal mixtures, walking backward 3 times while reciting a hymn to Thoth. It doesn't always work, but at least you tried. And trying is half of healing, the other half is rest. At the end of a long week, if you've paid your taxes, appeased the gods, avoided snake bites, and harvested something that hasn't been eaten by locusts, you deserve a celebration. Egypt is full of festivals. There's Weepa Trempet, the New Year festival. There's Opet, when the statues of Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu are paraded through the streets. There are harvest festivals, fertility dances, beer celebrations, and days devoted entirely to Hathor, goddess of music, love, and wine. You dress in your finest, freshly laundered linen, a dab of perfumed oil on your wig or bald scalp, and if you're feeling bold, a fake ceremonial beard strapped on with string. You sing, dance, feast, and flirt under the stars. You play music with clappers, flutes, and drums. You watch trained acrobats and wonder if their parents ever told them to stop jumping off furniture. For a moment, everything is golden. Even your sore feet feel blessed. Eventually, the music fades. The stars brighten. The coolness settles in. You lie on your roof, as many do, because it's cooler than indoors. You watch the sky. You whisper stories to your children. You thank the gods, or question them. You count the days until the flood recedes. You wonder if tomorrow the ox will cooperate. You fall asleep to the sound of crickets, frogs, and the distant hush of the Nile breathing. The same Nile your ancestors knew. The same Nile your grandchildren will pray over. The river flows. The sun will rise. And in the morning, you'll be ready to do it all again. It's noon in ancient Egypt. The sun hangs directly overhead, bloated and arrogant, like a smug housecat perched on the ceiling of the sky. The shadows are gone. The flies are not. You are sweating. So is your tunic. So is your donkey. So is your shadow, if you could find it. It's that sacred part of the day when everyone has had just enough food to be sleepy, but not enough to be happy. The streets smell like baking dust and beer foam, and somewhere in the distance, someone is yelling at a chicken. Welcome to the midday lull. You are a scribe again today. Surprise. The papyrus waits for no one. You sit in the corner of a low, windowless room, surrounded by rolled scrolls, jars of red and black ink, and your co-worker Nani, who has been muttering insults about a misfiled census report for the past 20 minutes. The document in front of you is a land dispute. Of course it is. Someone's goat allegedly wandered into someone else's barley field and caused emotional and financial devastation. The barley owner wants recompense. The goat owner wants a new wall. The local priest wants to be left alone. You write it all down, slowly, carefully, respecting the sacred order of bureaucratic chaos. Hieratic script dances across the page like a tipsy spider. You blot the ink with sand. You chew a date absent-mindedly and consider faking heat stroke. But you don't, because you are a professional, and because Nani would absolutely take your better inkstone if you left the room. Earlier this morning, you were called to mediate an actual goat incident. This is not uncommon. You approach the scene: a field, a fence, a goat, and two men yelling at each other while the goat chewed on what might have been a tax form. The first man claimed his grain was ruined. The second man claimed the goat had divine guidance. The goat claimed nothing. The goat burped. You took notes. You drew a quick diagram. You determined that, technically, the goat had wandered through the fence, not over it. You proposed a solution. The fence owner must repair the hole, and the goat owner must offer compensation in the form of onions and a small apology statue. Both men agreed, reluctantly. The goat remained unconcerned. You wrote a scroll titled, "On the Matter of the Fence and the Blessedly Confused Goat." After the fourth scroll and the seventh exasperated sigh, it is time for the midday meal. This means bread and beer. You step outside and immediately regret it. The air is hot enough to melt bronze. The light is so bright it makes your teeth hurt. But the promise of food propels you forward, past the chisel boys practicing their cartouches and the priest's assistant arguing with a monkey again. You sit in a shaded courtyard where a woman named Mena is ladling out beer from a large clay jar the size of a child. It's thick, warm, and the color of forgiveness. You drink. It tastes of barley, clay, and mild redemption. Next comes bread, flat, hard, and so dense it might qualify as a construction material. You dip it in some leftover bean paste, chew slowly, and watch your life pass before your eyes. Next to you, Nani is carving something into her bread with a stylus. "I'm filing a complaint," she says. You nod. You consider lying down under the nearest sycamore and whispering, "Osiris, take me." But instead you fan yourself with a broken piece of papyrus and pretend to be alive. The temple bells chime in the distance, a reminder that the gods do not sweat, and they definitely do not deal with mid-level administrative cases. You dream, briefly, of being a priest, wearing a fine white linen robe, perfumed with lotus oil, chanting in cool, shaded halls, spending your days with incense and metaphors. Then you remember they also have to perform purification rituals 6 times a day and shave their bodies every 48 hours. No thank you. You'll take your scrolls and sweat. Meanwhile, across town, your wife is embroiled in her own midday crisis. The bread dough isn't rising. The cat has stolen the fish off the hearth. The neighbor has come over to borrow salt for the 5th time this week and stays to complain about her husband's snoring. Your youngest child is attempting to eat a mud brick. Again, and the laundry is hanging out to dry. Only now it's on the ground because a goat, possibly the same one from this morning, knocked over the drying rack. Your wife sighs. She picks up the tunics. She shoes the goat. She bribes the cat with a leftover anchovy. She tells the neighbor to fetch her own salt next time. She does all of this while balancing a clay jug on her head. This is why the gods invented mothers. Refueled by beer and the faint hope of a quiet corner, you return to your writing table. More scrolls await. One is a list of temple donations from last week, mostly jars of honey, a few bolts of cloth, and something described as miscellaneous sacred goo. Another is a list of construction materials for the new canal. 500 bricks, 200 baskets of sand, 6 shovels, and a man named Hapu who apparently just stood around asking questions. You record everything meticulously. You invent a symbol that means excessive commentary and apply it liberally to Hapu's section. Outside, someone begins playing a flute. Badly. A chorus of dogs joins in. Then a rooster. Then silence. You try not to investigate. You finish your last scroll with a flourish, a perfect lotus blossom stamp at the bottom. You lean back. Your fingers are ink-stained. Your back is sore. Your heart is proud. This bureaucracy may be ridiculous, but it's your ridiculous. You pause to reflect on your work. Scribes were sacred, after all. You were the vessels of memory, the record keepers of gods and kings, the ones who made taxes permanent and brick inventories eternal. Without you, the world would be chaos. Goats would roam free. Temples would forget their festival dates. People would name their children things like Mighty Crocodile Nose, with no oversight. You are the ink-stained heroes of the Nile. even if your ink occasionally explodes in your satchel, even if your boss thinks spelling is optional, even if someone just handed you a scroll labeled, "Very urgent, complain about fishy smells, possibly cursed." You nod. You uncork the ink. You dip the reed. You begin to write. By mid-afternoon, the heat has melted time itself. Everything slows. Birds don't fly, they loiter. Flies don't buzz, they hover in existential crisis. Your colleagues are slumped in various poses of spiritual surrender. You all agree, without speaking, to pretend you're being productive until someone calls the end of the workday. A man walks in and asks for a copy of last year's census. You look at him as if he just asked you to build a pyramid with a spoon. You tell him it's being reviewed for divine approval. He nods solemnly. You both know this means we lost it and don't want to talk about it. And then, finally, a bell rings. A yawn echoes. Someone says, "R.A. bless this mess," and everyone begins to gather their scrolls. You walk home under a sky beginning to burn with the colors of copper and fig leaves. The breeze returns. The goats retreat. The scribes exhale. Back at home, dinner is almost ready. Lentil stew again, but it smells like comfort. Your daughter shows you a drawing she made in the dirt. A very tall man with a round belly and a crocodile tail. "Is this me?" you ask. "No," she says. "That's Daddy if he was a god." You smile. You are tired. You are stained with ink and breadcrumbs. And somewhere in the distance, another goat has gone rogue. But for now, you are home. And tomorrow will bring more scrolls, more barley, more bureaucracy, and with luck, less goat. The sun has risen. Again. And just like yesterday, and every day before that, someone in your village is already arguing about whose rooster crowed first. The answer doesn't matter. The rooster doesn't care. But in ancient Egypt, the morning isn't official until there's a mild dispute, a whiff of incense, and at least one child falling face first into a clay pot of something sacred. Welcome back. Today is a special day. Not because of any grand event. There's no royal visit, no eclipse, no harvest festival. But because today, like most days, you must navigate the holy, the hilarious, and the highly suspicious world of sacred temple duties, local gossip, and the endlessly mysterious grain, storage system. And somehow, all three are probably connected. It's Temple Duty Day. You're not a full-time priest, of course. Those positions are for men and women of serious discipline, shaved heads, and highly suspicious eyebrows. You're more of a part-time sacred assistant, a fill-in, a spiritual substitute teacher. Today's task: prepare the offering table, sweep the courtyard, avoid accidentally offending any deity whose statue is staring at you with one eyebrow raised. You arrive at the temple just as the full-time priest, Bekatep, is finishing his morning purification bath, the third of the day. He greets you with a nod, a linen towel, and a list of things not to do near the sacred incense burner. At the center of the temple is the shrine, a gilded box containing the statue of the god, placed on a stone pedestal and surrounded by offerings, carvings, and the occasional misplaced cat. You bow. You breathe. You begin. The duties are precise. Sweep in one direction only clockwise. Offer lotus petals before the bread. Do not sneeze near the statue. If you drop a date, don't pick it up. It now belongs to the god. You spend the morning humming sacred hymns under your breath, pretending you remember the words, and carefully arranging offerings while trying not to get scratched by the temple cat, who is, according to legend, a direct descendant of Batet and fully aware of it. Once temple duty is complete, you step outside for a moment of fresh air and are immediately ambushed by the village's finest information network, the grandmothers. They sit under the tamarisk tree every morning, weaving, talking, and processing the local events faster than any royal courier. Today's topics include the new young scribe who allegedly misspelled Horus as horse in a temple inscription, the mysterious disappearance of 3 loaves of bread from the community oven, the midwife who claimed she saw a crocodile spirit dancing on the riverbank during the last full moon, and of course, the fact that the granary keeper's new assistant, a boy with suspiciously clean fingernails, might be touched by chaos. You nod politely. You make non-committal sounds. You try to escape, but one of the women grabs your elbow and whispers. The priest's nephew has a tattoo of Sekhmet on his shoulder. On his shoulder. You gasp appropriately. They beam. You are now part of the gossip cycle. There is no escape. The granary is the heart of the village and the stomach. Inside, enormous clay silos are filled with dried grain. Or at least they should be. That depends on the harvest, the accuracy of the scribes, the honesty of the laborers, and the willingness of the gods to overlook accidental redistribution. Today you're assisting the grain counter, a man named Dedi, who walks with a limp and carries a stick carved with tiny notches, one for every year he's worked in the granary. He taps it against the ground as he inspects each silo. "You see that?" he grunts, pointing at the pile of wheat. "Too round. Someone's added sand to bulk it." You frown. "Why?" "To trick the tax collectors." You nod. He leans in. Or maybe the tax collectors tricked the priests. Or maybe the priest tricked the goat keeper. Or maybe the goat keeper doesn't exist. You're not sure if he's serious. You write it down anyway. You spend the next 2 hours chasing a mouse through the grain bins. It's fast. It's clever. It is the very spirit of resistance. You and 2 others attempt to corner it with a broom, a basket, and a lot of screaming. The mouse escapes, possibly becomes a minor deity, and Dedi mutters something about needing more cats. You sweep the spilled grain back into the pile. You document the loss. You pray the mouse didn't nibble anything divine. Your family is busy. Your wife is kneading dough. The smell of yeast and cumin fills the house. She hums a song to keep rhythm, the same song her grandmother taught her. Your son is helping to wash linen, dragging cloth across flat stones with a focus reserved only for children and very angry priests. Your daughter is painting small symbols on the courtyard wall. Some are birds. Some are flowers. One looks suspiciously like the granary keeper, but fatter. Your mother-in-law is watching everyone like a hawk. She points out a spot missed on the linen. She sniffs the stew and adds garlic without asking. She tells your daughter to use less red. You love her in the way one loves a warm fire that occasionally burns your eyebrows. That night, over dinner, your uncle tells a story. He's old, possibly older than Egypt itself. His teeth are fewer than the gods he worships, and he smells faintly of onions and sandalwood. He tells of a time the gods walked the earth, when people could speak to falcons and crocodiles alike, when a priest accidentally summoned a wind spirit that sneezed his scrolls into the Nile. Your daughter laughs. Your son asks if the spirit ever came back. Your wife rolls her eyes. Your mother-in-law declares she remembers that story being true. Uncle nods as if to say, everything is true eventually. You smile. These are the myths that shape your world, messy, marvelous, slightly absurd. Just like life itself. You close the night with a visit to the local shrine, a small altar near the edge of the village, surrounded by reeds, beetles, and offerings in various states of freshness. You light a candle. You pour a bit of beer. You whisper a prayer to Heka, god of magic, for patience. Then to Thoth for wisdom. Then to Batet, because the cat is watching you. Then to Renanudit, guardian of grain, because you still feel bad about the mouse. You leave a dried fig and hope it's not an insult. As you walk home, the stars bloom above you like painted flowers. You breathe. You think. You laugh at the absurdity of it all, the sacred and the silly, the prayers and the paperwork. Late at night, the village quiets. The wind carries whispers, reeds rustling, palm fronds brushing, the occasional owl asking philosophical questions to the moon. You lie on the roof again. Your daughter sleeps beside you, curled around a clay doll shaped like Hathor. You hear voices below, your wife and the neighbor quietly trading stories, jokes, and possibly stolen cumin. You let it all sink in. The gods above, the grain below, the gossip swirling between them. In Egypt, the divine lives in the details, in mouse tracks, in wedding rumors, in the exact shape of your bread loaf. Nothing is too small to matter. And everything, Everything is connected. Now it comes to love. Love. It blooms in the land of scorching sun and sacred cats. It giggles behind clay ovens. It flirts between rows of date palms. It leaves passive-aggressive offerings at the local shrine. Welcome to romance, ancient Egyptian style. Today, we leave the temple scrolls and grain silos behind and instead peek behind the curtains, or rather, reed mats, of the Egyptian home. Because beneath the divine rituals, beneath the grand stone monuments, beneath the elaborate bureaucracy, people still fell in love. They still fought about whose turn it was to clean the house god's figurine. They still argued over whose mother made better lentil stew. They still divorced with all the elegance of a written contract that included who gets the goose. This is the sacred and sometimes ridiculous world of Egyptian relationships. It all begins with a glance, a joke, a shared amphora of beer. Courtship in ancient Egypt wasn't governed by dowries and royal alliances for most people, just interest, compatibility, and sometimes a little divine nudging. You're a young farmer's son, recently promoted to the one who carries the heavy basket. She's a potter's daughter, whose laugh has ruined your concentration for a week. You try to impress her by helping her carry water from the well. You drop the jar. She laughs. You make a joke about the jar being possessed by a spirit of awkwardness. She snorts. You are now technically engaged. Ancient Egyptian love poetry is some of the most beautiful and cheekily bold literature we've found. Written on scraps of papyrus, ostraca shards of pottery, and the occasional temple wall, these poems compare lovers to papyrus blossoms, beer foam, sacred bulls, and in one case, a particularly juicy fig. Here's a real translation. My heart flutters hastily when I think of you. It lets me not act sensibly. It lets me not put on a dress. Another favorite. I am your best girl, walking beside you, watering your garden. Let me be your servant, but also not. Love wasn't shy in Egypt. It was sung, shouted, and possibly carved onto the bathroom wall when no one was looking. So you're in love. What's next? Marriage in ancient Egypt was both casual and official. There were no priests, no temple vows. You didn't need a ceremony, though many had one. You simply moved in together and told the neighbors. But for legality, there was a contract. Yes, even in 1300 BCE, Egyptians loved paperwork. These contracts outlined shared property, division of labor, children's inheritance, and what happened in case of separation. Sometimes they even included love clauses. The husband shall not say to the wife, "You are not pleasing to me." You think modern prenups are spicy? Try reading that after your spouse burns the stew. Your home is a modest mud brick house. 2 rooms, a courtyard, a roof where you sleep during hot months. Inside, woven mats, clay pots, reed baskets, and at least one very judgmental cat. Your wife tends the hearth. You tend the fields. Your lives are intertwined like flax fibers. You make decisions together, how to divide the grain, how many jars of oil to trade, whether the neighbor's son is cursed or just artistic. You bicker. You joke. You roll your eyes in the sacred tradition of all long-married couples. And if things get truly bad, well, yes, ancient Egyptians divorced. And not in whispers or shame. It was common, accepted, documented. If a marriage failed, a spouse, often the wife, could initiate separation. Reasons might include infidelity, abuse, financial negligence, or simply he smells like fish too often. The divorce was recorded in a written document, assets were divided, and both parties often remarried. No gods were angry. No curses were thrown. No tabloids were involved. Sometimes the exes still shared custody of goats. Children were blessings. Also chaos gremlins. They were named after gods, grandparents, or occasionally dreams. One document refers to a child named Joy of Botet, eater of bread. You bathe them with care. You teach them hymns, numbers, and why it's rude to bite the neighbor. Girls helped with housework. Boys apprenticed in trades. Everyone learned to respect cats and not anger river spirits. And yes, there were lullabies. Soft songs about the Nile, the stars, and the goddess Isis wrapping her wings around sleeping children. You sang them at night, when the wind turned cold and the frogs chirped outside. You sang them for comfort, and also to drown out the sound of your son kicking his pottery wheel again. Egyptians were affectionate. Art shows couples holding hands, touching shoulders, embracing tenderly. Husbands praised their wives as mistress of the house and singer of my heart. Wives called their husbands builder of our days and sometimes the one who doesn't snore today. There was kissing. There were massages with scented oils. There were shared baths, not daily, but definitely appreciated. One ancient prescription recommends honey and myrrh for better affection. Another simply says, offer bread, speak well, and never insult her mother's soup. Good advice. Timeless, really. Even in death, love remained sacred. Spouses were buried together when possible. Tomb inscriptions often say things like, I walk with you into the west. I wait for your heart beside the horizon. Letters to the dead, actual texts found buried, beg loved ones for help from beyond. Our son is sick. Please intercede. I miss your voice. Send me a dream. Tell the gods I still make the stew the way you liked. Love crossed boundaries. It became prayer, myth, memory. In the end, even the gods were jealous of it. And so another day ends. You lie beside your partner on the roof. The stars pulse softly above you, ancient and familiar. The air smells of palm leaves and cooling bricks. Your fingers are interlocked. Your thoughts wander quietly. You speak of children, of dreams, of that time the cat set itself on fire trying to steal a fish. He's fine. He's smug about it. You laugh. You sigh. You rest. Love in Egypt was not a mystery. It was a rhythm, a ritual, a daily offering. And every morning, it began again. The sun peeks gently over the rooftops, like a polite houseguest unsure if it's too early to knock. In the courtyard, a young woman leans over a bowl of water, lined with lotus petals. She isn't washing dishes. She isn't preparing herbs. She's admiring her reflection, adjusting a strand of dark hair, smoothing the linen on her shoulder, and dabbing a speck of powdered malachite beneath her eyes. It's morning in ancient Egypt, and beauty is not just vanity. It's ritual, it's power, it's protection. Because in this world, how you look is how you live, how you pray, how you assert yourself, how you walk through the dusty street with your chin lifted just a little higher than the day before. Today, we walk in the footsteps of Egyptian women, queens and couriers, perfumers and priestesses, to uncover a world of scent, color, and cleverness that shaped an entire civilization. And yes, there will be eyeliner. You wake up, you stretch, you yawn, you oil. Egyptian beauty routines begin with the body, because the desert air is not kind, and neither is the gossip about cracked heels. Perfumed oils are applied from head to toe, made from morena, sesame, castor, and sometimes a blend called kifi, which includes cinnamon, myrrh, wine, and a warning label for smelling too good. You rub oil into your scalp. You massage it into your shoulders. You pretend not to notice your neighbor's son watching you from behind a palm tree. You oil your feet last, always last, because stepping on a clay shard in the middle of your morning beauty routine is very undignified. Now comes the makeup. And make no mistake, this isn't about impressing boys. This is medicine. This is magic. This is defense. You dip a carved stick into a powdered green stone, malachite, and apply it gently to your eyelids. It cools. It soothes. It sparkles. Then comes the black coal, made from galena and lead sulfide, crushed and mixed with fat or water. You line your eyes into the shape of a sacred falcon. Not only is it beautiful, it's functional. It reflects the sun, repels flies, and according to the priests of Horus, wards off the evil eye. Think of it as sunglasses, antibiotics, and a spell, all in one fierce stare. Your cosmetics are stored in a box. Not just any box, a carefully carved wooden chest, with compartments for pigment, oil, tweezers, mirrors, and a tiny spoon shaped like a goddess. These beauty kits were buried with their owners. found in tombs beside flutes and fruit bowls. Because in the afterlife, you still want to look fabulous. Obviously, common contents include shells filled with ochre, bone combs, ivory hairpins, beeswax lip tints, and a note from your mother saying, "Don't forget to reapply before meeting Osiris." Some boxes even feature built-in mirrors made of polished bronze. And if you're particularly wealthy, yours might be shaped like a duck. Yes, a duck. Quack with confidence. No conversation about Egyptian beauty is complete without perfume. It is the invisible crown worn by farmers and pharaohs alike. It wafts through temple halls. It clings to pillowcases. It dances behind your ears like a whispered secret. Perfume makers, often women, were highly respected artisans. Their recipes were guarded more tightly than royal wine cellars. Popular ingredients included frankincense, myrrh, lotus, cinnamon, honey, and resins imported from the land of Punt, which sounds fake, but was very real and very fragrant. Perfume was worn in solid cones atop the head, slowly melting throughout the day, releasing scent and, occasionally, judgment. You walk through the marketplace. You smell like joy. People move aside, unsure if you're sacred or just smug. Let them wonder. Egyptian women wore linen, always linen, because wool was itchy and sacrilegious. And let's be honest, sweat trapping in a land where the sun is basically a judgmental spotlight. You select your dress for the day. Will it be the pleated ankle length with the clever shoulder strap, the sheer overlay with the beadwork, the high-status version with gold thread and a bold statement collar, or just the simple wrap, belted at the waist, with a touch of carnelian? Whatever you choose, it must be breathable, beautiful, and suitable for running after your children, feeding the goose, and maybe confronting a lazy official about your neighbor's stolen sandals. You finish with jewelry, always jewelry. Wide collars made of faience and lapis, bracelets of turquoise, anklets that jingle like gossip, and earrings so large they could serve as soup ladles. You are ready. The street is your catwalk. Walk like an empress, even if you're going to the butcher. Not all Egyptian women were queens. Most were workers, farmers, traders, bakers, priestesses, midwives, perfumers, and scroll-copying scribes with opinions about everything. And most of them ran the household with the quiet ferocity of a desert storm. Responsibilities included managing food stores, budgeting grain, negotiating trades, brewing beer, sewing linen, tending animals, raising children, and defeating snakes, both literal and metaphorical. But women could also own property, run businesses, represent themselves in court, sue for divorce, and inherit wealth. They weren't always equal in practice, but legally, pretty close. Egypt was surprisingly modern in its respect for women's autonomy, at least compared to other ancient societies. Queens ruled, goddesses thundered, mothers terrified, daughters inherited, wives negotiated, and in art, they were depicted beside their husbands, not behind them, usually smiling, probably because they knew who was really in charge. Women were the center of spiritual life, too. Priestesses served in temples, especially those of goddesses like Hathor, Isis, and Neith. They sang, they danced, they poured offerings, they kept the sacred flame alive. They also cast spells for fertility, protection, and let's be honest, occasional petty revenge. You might visit a healer woman if your crops were failing, your child was sick, your husband had wandering eyes, or a rat stole your bread and you wanted divine assistance in retaliation. The lines between medicine, magic, and makeup were thin. One scroll even recommends a face cream made with honey and crushed turquoise to restore both complexion and patience. Modern dermatology could never. Aging was not feared, it was decorated. Grandmothers were honored, feared, and mildly dangerous when wielding a cooking ladle. Wrinkles were signs of a life well lived. Gray hair was covered in henna. Missing teeth were mostly ignored. You told stories. You gave advice. You told your daughter she was applying her eyeliner too thick. You told your granddaughter to never marry a man who forgets offerings on festival days. When you died, your family buried you with cosmetics. They painted your tomb with your favorite outfit. They wrote that you were beloved of Hathor and the rose of the courtyard. They placed your mirror beside your amulets, because in the field of reeds, the Egyptian heaven, you still needed to look good. You would wake among flowers. You would oil your skin. You would line your eyes. And you would meet the gods face to face, looking absolutely radiant. The morning doesn't begin with a rooster crowing. It begins with a prayer. Quiet, whispered, mumbled with a mouth still full of sleep and yesterday's lentils. You stir the cooking pot. You sweep the threshold. You mutter the same words your grandmother did. Thank you, R.A., for your rising. Keep the snakes out. Let the stew not burn. And may today's errands be blessed and brief. Welcome to spiritual life in ancient Egypt. Not the grand temples or golden shrines, but the everyday world of faith. The world of clay gods tucked in corners, of house spirits and festival leftovers, of amulets tied around baby ankles and cats that are not just cats. Today, we step into the sacred space between cooking and breathing, where belief lives not in epic miracles, but in daily rituals, soft gestures, and the long, slow prayer of boiling beans. Your home is not just where you sleep and eat and argue about misplaced sandals. It's a holy place. The Egyptians believed that every home carried divine energy, a sort of portable shrine where humans and spirits cohabitated, often awkwardly, like roommates who share a kitchen but not a sense of humor. At the entrance, you might find a carved figure of Bes, the dwarf god of protection, music, and scaring away demons by making faces. An offering shelf with stale bread and dates for the ancestors. A clay pot of Nile water, blessed during a festival and now slightly questionable, but still sacred. A hand-drawn symbol of an ankh on the wall, for life, luck, and possibly better crop yields. You sweep carefully, not just for cleanliness, but to avoid disturbing tiny guardian spirits. You burn a pinch of incense, not just for smell, but to thank the gods for not letting your goat eat your laundry again. Everything has meaning, even if it's mildly absurd. Let's talk animals. In Egypt, pets were not just cute companions. They were divine intermediaries. The most obvious? Cats. Elegant, mysterious, homicidal. Associated with the goddess Batet, cats were protectors of the home, defenders of children, and ruthless murderers of anything with more than 4 legs. You feed yours first. You brush her fur. You apologize if you sneeze in her presence. There are laws, actual written laws, against harming a cat. Kill one, and you're in serious trouble. Touch one without its permission, and you're probably cursed for 3 generations. Also considered sacred. Ibises, linked to Thoth. Hawks, Horus. Dogs, loyal guardians. Crocodiles, Sobuk. Frogs, symbol of fertility. And occasionally, hippos, though mostly in a please don't eat me sense. Your household may not have all of these animals, but chances are, one of them shows up in your dreams, or your laundry basket. Either way, you leave an offering, just in case. Feeling unlucky? There's an amulet for that. Feeling blessed but want extra insurance? There's an amulet for that too. Amulets, small charms made of faience, stone, metal, or glass, were used for literally everything. Some favorites: the Eye of Horus, Wedjat for protection, healing, and looking intimidating during arguments. The Scarab Beetle, for rebirth, transformation, and rolling through life like dung, but nobly. The Ankh, for life, vitality, and decorating every surface possible. Jed Pillar, for stability, good posture, and metaphysical backbone. You might wear one around your neck. Tie one to your child's wrist. Bury one in your garden for fertility. Or tuck one under your mattress in case of visitors. Priests blessed them. Merchants sold them. Grandmothers insisted they worked better if kissed 3 times and never discussed out loud. Amulets were not accessories. They were insurance policies. Adorable, magical, slightly overpriced insurance policies. Now, faith isn't all incense and anxiety. Sometimes it's a party. Egyptians loved festivals. Almost every god had one. They involved music, dancing, feasting, drinking, parading statues down the river, occasionally launching tiny flaming boats as symbolic messages to the divine and/or local crocodiles. Popular celebrations include Weepa Trempet, the New Year festival, the Feast of Opet, when Ammonius and his family took a boat ride, the Beautiful Feast of the Valley, a mix of honoring the dead and picnic, the Day of Drunkenness. Yes, that was a real one, honoring Hathor's near destruction of humanity and her redemption through beer. Your whole village gets involved. Offerings are stacked. The bakery works overtime. Children wear flower crowns and eat too much. You sing. You dance. You pray that this year the flaming boat doesn't tip over and hit the fish stall again. Not everyone has time to keep up with spiritual trends. That's where priests come in. Priests and priestesses were full-time divine caretakers. They shaved their bodies, fasted regularly, bathed multiple times a day, and avoided onions before rituals. They read omens in the flight of birds. They interpreted dreams. They said things like, "That itch on your elbow is Ra's disapproval," and meant it. They also handled temple business, record-keeping, wealth management, goose wrangling, and making sure sacred barks didn't drift into the wrong canal again. If you needed divine guidance, you visited the local temple. For a price, a chicken, a jar of oil, or a very good joke, a priest might consult the gods for you. Sometimes the answers were cryptic. Other times, a pigeon flew into the temple and knocked over a candle. You took that as a sign of something. Evening comes. The fires dim. The children quiet eventually. The frogs begin their nightly opera. And you pray. Not loudly, not dramatically, just softly. You thank Isis for the health of your son. You ask Taret to protect your unborn niece. You whisper to the spirits of your ancestors, hoping they're not too busy to help you find your lost sandal. You place a statue near your sleeping mat, a small clay goddess, worn at the nose. You tuck a charm under your pillow, a painted eye, a promise. You fall asleep to the hum of crickets and sacred hope. And if you dream of a blue lotus, that's lucky. If you dream of fish, you probably ate too much lentil stew. The magic of ancient Egyptian faith isn't in the giant temples or the spectacular myths. It's in the tiny repetitions. The same prayer whispered while baking bread. The small carved beetle passed from grandmother to child. The way you pause before stepping into your house, just to nod at the little statue on the wall. It's quiet. It's worn smooth by centuries. It smells like date wine, old papyrus, and incense ash. And though gods may thunder in the sky, they also sit beside you at dinner. They bless your sleep. They listen when no one else does. That's the real miracle. The sun begins to set, not just over the village, over a life. The fire in the hearth dims. The cat, for once, does not complain. And somewhere nearby, the wail of morning begins, low, rhythmic, ancient. In ancient Egypt, death was not an ending. It was a continuation, a crossing. It wasn't feared the way it is in many cultures. It was prepared for, negotiated, practiced, because the next world, the field of reeds, wasn't just a dream. It was real. And if you were wise, you packed for it early. With linen, with bread, and with a small army of clay figurines ready to do your chores forever. Tonight, we explore the final journey. From your last breath, to the embalmer's workshop, to the court of Osiris, to eternity, hopefully, with your favorite wine, your best sandals, and not too many ex-spouses. Let's be honest, nobody wants to die. But in ancient Egypt, death was just another phase of life, like marriage or taxes, but with slightly better jewelry. The moment someone passed, their loved ones leapt into action. They wept publicly, loudly and impressively, tore their linen garments, bonus points for dramatic flair, sprinkled dust on their heads, hired professional mourners, yes, that was a thing. Then the real work began, because a good afterlife didn't happen by accident. You needed rituals. You needed specialists. You needed the best embalmers in town. Or at least one who didn't drink too much palm wine while handling the organs. You didn't just get buried. You got mummified. And no, it wasn't just for kings. Even middle-class folks could afford a decent package, kind of like ancient funeral insurance. Step 1. The embalmers. They arrived like ancient spa workers with a flair for drama and sawdust. They washed the body, removed the internal organs, except the heart, dried it out with natron salt, wrapped it in linen, sometimes hundreds of meters of it, stuffed the wrappings with amulets, herbs, and notes for the gods, applied resins to preserve, added a mask if you could afford it, stylish and spiritually practical. The brain, removed through the nose. This fact haunts us all. But it worked. 40 to 70 days later, voila, a mummy. And not just a body wrapped in gauze, but a sacred vessel prepared for eternity. Your stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs? They were lovingly preserved in canopic jars. Each jar had a lid shaped like one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imsidy, human head liver. Duamutef, jackal stomach. Hapi, baboon lungs. Kabasinuf, falcon intestines. These jars were placed near the body, not for aesthetics, but because the gods might need those parts later. Strangely, your heart stayed inside you. It would be weighed in the afterlife, against a feather. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, there's the tomb. And trust me, there's a lot of preparation involved. Egyptian tombs ranged from humble pits in the sand to vast stone complexes filled with art, curses, and suspiciously rich goose recipes. But whatever the size, a tomb served the same purpose. Shelter the body, house your possessions, create a portal between this world and the next. You didn't go alone. You were buried with bread and beer, tools, jewelry, your favorite game boards, a statue or 2 of yourself, in case your ghost needed help remembering your jawline. And most importantly, Shabtis. Shabtis were small figures, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, that would come to life in the afterlife to do all your chores. Imagine having ghost interns. They even carried little hoes and baskets. Some Egyptians buried a whole set for each day of the year. Because who wants to harvest ghost wheat forever? Buried with you, or painted on your tomb wall, was the Book of the Dead. Not a single book, really, more like a customizable travel guide, written in spells and illustrations. It included maps of the underworld, passwords for passing through gates, names of demons to flatter or avoid, transformation spells, turn into a bird to avoid crocodile spirits, instructions for how to convince Osiris you were a decent human. One popular spell reads, I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not been loud in the temple, I have not eaten the sacrificial goose, I have not worn too much coal. Some of those may be lies, but the gods appreciated good effort. Finally, you arrive at the Hall of Ma'at. Here, your heart is weighed against the feather of truth. If your heart is light, you pass. If it's heavy with sin, well, a monstrous creature named Ammit eats it. She's part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, and 100% uninterested in excuses. Luckily, if you've lived well, made the right offerings, and remembered to include your Book of the Dead cliff notes, your heart passes the test. You're welcomed into paradise. And if not, well, no afterlife, just eternal snacks for Ammit. If your heart is pure, you enter Sekitaru, the field of reeds. It's Egypt but better. No taxes, no snakes, no sand in your food. The sun is warm, but never burns. The rivers are full, but never flood. The fields grow without toil. You reunite with loved ones. You harvest only for fun. You get the good beer. The bread never goes stale. And best of all, your Shabtis do the chores. It's peace. It's plenty. It's home. Eternally. But even in paradise, you want to be remembered. That's why your name is carved deep. That's why your grandchildren light lamps near your tomb. That's why your statue stands tall, even if your nose has fallen off. Egyptians believed you died 3 times. First, when your body stopped. Second, when you were buried. Third, when your name was spoken for the last time. So memory was sacred. To be remembered was to live. That's why so many stories survive, why we still whisper their names. Because even thousands of years later, they are not forgotten. So now, we've reached the end. The sun sets one last time over the Nile. The river murmurs like a lullaby, and the wind drifts softly through ancient reeds and forgotten windows, whispering to gods and ghosts alike. You've walked with farmers, priests, lovers, and cats. You've tasted beer brewed in clay jugs, felt the weight of coal on your eyelids, and listened to prayers murmured in the shadows of temples. You've wandered markets and tombs, homes and heavens. You've lived, for just a little while, as one of them. An Egyptian not from myth, but from the morning. Not carved in stone, but kneading bread with calloused hands. Tending goats, washing linens, laughing with friends, whispering thanks to the gods after each small miracle. A rain that came early, a fever that passed, a cat that forgave. And now you rest, just as they did, because sleep, too, was sacred. The Egyptians believed dreams were doors, that the night let your soul wander, not lost, but seeking. So tonight, maybe you dream of green fields, of soft music drifting from a courtyard, of golden light pouring over limestone walls, warming your face. Maybe you walk beside a friend. Maybe a priest offers you a flower. Maybe a goddess smiles from behind a veil of incense. And maybe, just maybe, you wake in the morning with sand in your memory and a faint smell of lotus on the air. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you're still listening, still curled beneath your blanket, drifting between waking and dream, you're not alone. Thousands of years ago, another soul did the same. On a roof under the stars, beside a river, with a prayer on their lips. And now, so do you. If this journey helped you drift off, or if you smiled just once among the sand and stories, I'd be honored if you'd leave a quiet comment below. Maybe tell me where in the world you're listening from, or which part of Egypt you'd love to visit in this life or the next. And if you'd like to return to sleep again among the ancients, feel free to like the video or gently subscribe. There's always another story waiting, just beyond the veil of dream. Good night, and may the gods walk gently beside your dreams.